Daniel was a man who valued peace more than anything else. He worked hard during the week, and whenever he wanted to breathe freely, he would go to the land that his late grandfather had left him. It was not a fancy property, not a shining mansion, or a polished garden, but it was wide and open, filled with grass, a few tall trees, and the quiet sound of the wind. To Daniel, it was perfect. He never felt the need to build a big house on it or to sell it for money. That land carried memories of his childhood, of running around with his cousins, listening to his grandfather tell stories under the shade of a tree. Every time he stepped onto the soil, he felt closer to his family and to the man who had taught him so many lessons. Most people in the neighborhood did not see the land the way Daniel did. They saw it as empty space, as the area around. His property was slowly filling with houses, neat lawns, and cars parked in driveways. Families moved in, and with them came rules, gatherings, and the ever-watchful eyes of the Homeowners Association. At the head of the HOA was Karen, a woman who loved control as much as she loved attention. She had a large house, a carefully trimmed yard, and a habit of commenting on other people's choices. Karen noticed Daniel's land every time she passed by. She would stop, place her hands on her hips, shake her head as though she could not understand why anyone would leave such a good spot untouched. To her, it looked like wasted potential. Sometimes she would say it aloud, to neighbors or even directly to Daniel when she happened to see him. She would laugh and tell him, "One day someone is going to make this place beautiful. Right now, it just looks abandoned." Daniel would smile politely, but never argue. He knew what the land meant to him. It wasn't just dirt and grass. It was memory and peace. He did not care if it wasn't beautiful in Karen's eyes. He did not need shiny bricks and fences to feel proud. He wanted the land to stay just as it was until the day he felt ready to do something with it. There were times when Daniel thought about the differences between himself and people like Karen. For him, life was about quiet moments and holding on to family history. For her, life seemed to be about appearances, about showing the world something that looked perfect. Their paths crossed only occasionally, but whenever they did, Daniel could sense Karen's disapproval. It did not bother him much. He had learned not to waste energy on people who could not understand him. One late afternoon, as the sun painted the sky orange, Daniel sat on an old wooden chair under a tree on the land. He closed his eyes and let the wind brush against his face. In that moment, he remembered his grandfather's voice. His grandfather used to say, "Land is not just land, boy. It is roots. It is a reminder of where you come from, if you care. For it will always care for you." Daniel carried those words in his heart, and that was the reason he would never sell the property, no matter how many times people suggested it. Some neighbors were kind and respected his choice, but others whispered behind his back saying he was wasting a good opportunity. Karen, of course, was the loudest among them. At a neighborhood barbecue, she once joked to everyone, "If Daniel doesn't want that land, maybe I should take it and build myself another house." People laughed, but Daniel noticed the way her eyes shone with something more than just humor. It was as if she truly meant it. He brushed it off, thinking she was only being dramatic the way she often was. Still, her words stayed in his mind. He knew Karen loved control, and the idea of her being serious about taking his land seemed ridiculous at the time. Yet he couldn't shake off the feeling that she thought she had more power than she actually did. Daniel had never had trouble with the HOA before, but he had heard stories of how Karen bullied neighbors into following rules that suited her. She enjoyed bending situations to her advantage. Daniel continued to visit his land every week, walking slowly around its edges, touching the rough bark of the trees, and sometimes sitting down to watch the stars at night. Those moments reminded him why he held on to it. It was not about money. It was about keeping something alive, something pure in a world where people like Karen only cared about status. He even thought about planting more trees, maybe turning it into a small orchard, like his grandfather once dreamed of. As the weeks went on, Karen's comments grew bolder. One morning, when Daniel was unlocking the small gate to enter the land, she walked by with her little dog. She stopped and said in a sweet but fake tone, You know, Daniel, you could sell this place and live a very comfortable life. Why cling to something you're not even using? Don't you want to see it developed instead of sitting here like a patch of weeds? Daniel kept his calm, replying softly, I use it in my own way. It's not weeds to me. Karen rolled her eyes, tugged at her dog's leash, and muttered, such a waste. She walked away, but her voice carried back to him as she added, people like you don't know the value of land. Daniel sighed, but let the words roll off. He knew she couldn't understand his connection to the place. What he didn't know was how far her greed and arrogance would take her. For now, life continued as usual. Daniel worked during the week, visited his land often, and ignored the gossip of neighbors. He believed his peace was untouchable, that no one could take away something that rightfully belonged to him. What he did not realize was that Karen, behind her sharp smiles and bold words, was already planning something that would test his patience and shake the very peace he thought was secure. The land remained quiet, filled with memories, while a storm of trouble slowly built around it, hidden in the shadows of Karen's ambition. When Daniel returned after being away for a few months, he expected to find his land the same as always, quiet, green, and untouched. He had been sent out of town for work, a long project that kept him busy day and night. But in his mind, he often pictured the trees on his property swaying gently in the wind, the ground waiting for him to walk on it again. That thought always gave him comfort, like knowing a safe place was waiting whenever he needed it. But when he finally drove down the familiar road and turned the corner, his heart skipped a beat. He slowed his car and blinked several times, not believing what his eyes were showing him. Right there, on the very land he had cherished all his life, stood a massive house. Not a small structure, not a simple mistake of someone putting up a shed, but a full-blown two-story house with fresh paint, large windows, and a porch that wrapped around the front. The sound of construction tools still echoed as workers moved. Around fixing the last details, Daniel pulled over and stepped out of his car. Shoes sank slightly into the dirt, the same dirt that once carried his childhood footsteps, but now it felt different, invaded. He stood frozen for a few seconds, his jaw tight, his hands shaking as anger and confusion rushed through him all at once. How could this be? How could someone have built an entire house on land that clearly belonged to him? He walked closer, his eyes scanning every detail of the construction. A truck was parked outside, with ladders leaning against the walls. Smell of fresh wood and cement filled the air. A group of workers noticed him and gave polite nods, as if he were just another curious passerby. But Daniel wasn't a passerby, he was the owner. Finally, he spoke to one of the men carrying tools. "Excuse me," he said, his voice steady but filled with tension. "Whose house is this?" The worker wiped sweat from his forehead and replied casually, "This belongs to Mrs. Karen, sir. She's been working on this project for a while now. Beautiful home, isn't it?" Daniel's blood boiled. Karen, of course. The woman who had always criticized him for leaving the land empty. The woman who had joked about taking it, thought those were just words, careless remarks thrown around to show off. But now, here it was in front of him, the proof that she hadn't been joking at all. He clenched his fists, trying not to explode in front of the workers. It wasn't their fault. They were just doing their jobs. But inside him, a storm was brewing. He took a deep breath and asked again, more firmly this time, "Did she say she owned this land?" The worker shrugged, clearly not wanting to get involved. "All I know is she hired us. She showed the papers, signed the contracts. That's all I can tell you." Daniel felt his heart pounding in his chest. He turned away and walked a few steps back, staring at the house as though it were a monster that had grown overnight on his soil. His grandfather's land, the place he had promised never to give away, was now buried under someone else's dream house. He pulled out his phone immediately and opened his folder of documents. He had the deed saved as scanned copies, along with all the legal proof that the land was his. There it was, his grandfather's name, then his father's, and finally his own. Clear ownership, no doubt, no confusion. Karen had no right to even step on the land, let alone build a mansion. But why hadn't anyone stopped her? Where were the permits, the city checks, the legal barriers? How had she managed to bypass all of that? Daniel already knew the answer. Karen was the head of the HOA. She had influence, connections, and a boldness that made her believe she could bend the rules to her liking. She probably waved her hands, flashed fake smiles, and convinced the right people that everything was fine. And while Daniel was away, she had taken advantage of his absence. The thought of her arrogance made his teeth grind. He imagined her standing proudly on the porch, looking down at him with her usual smug smile, saying, "Well, you weren't using it, so I did." Daniel didn't go knocking on her door right away. He knew himself too well. His anger was too hot, and if he faced her in that moment, he might say something he would regret. Instead, he decided to gather his strength, his evidence, and his patience. This was bigger than a neighborly argument. This was theft, plain and clear. He spent that night sitting in his car near the land, staring at the glowing lights of the new house. Every hammer sound and every worker's shout felt like a knife in his chest. He thought of his grandfather's words about protecting the land, and it broke him to see it taken so shamelessly. But he also felt something else, a deep determination. Karen had crossed the line, and he would make sure she paid for it. Next morning, Daniel went to the local records office, pulled out every file he had, confirming once again that he was the rightful owner. The staff there recognized him and confirmed that no transfer had ever been made. The property was his. Without question, Karen had either lied her way through or used false documents. Either way, her entire house stood on stolen ground. When he finally gathered enough proof in his hands, Daniel drove to Karen's house. She was outside watering her flowers, her face lighting up when she saw him. Not with warmth, but with that same superior smirk. "Oh, Daniel," she said sweetly. "Did you see the new house? Isn't it lovely? That land has purpose." Daniel's voice was cold. "That land was never yours, Karen." She tilted her head, pretending not to understand. "Well, it wasn't being used, and the neighborhood needed improvement. You'll see, everyone will thank me for this." Words cut through him like glass. The nerve, the audacity, the shamelessness of her tone, it was unbelievable. But Daniel didn't shout. He didn't argue. Instead, he stared straight at her and said calmly, "You've made a huge mistake. And soon, you'll realize just how big it is." He turned and walked away, leaving her standing there with her fake smile fading slowly. He knew this fight would not be easy. She was powerful in her own circle, and she believed the HOA's influence would protect her. But Daniel also knew something more powerful than influence, truth, and law. And he had both on his side. The land might have been invaded, but it wasn't lost. Not yet. And Daniel was prepared to do whatever it took to take back what was rightfully his. When Daniel finally confronted Karen face to face about the house, he expected at least a flicker of guilt, maybe a trace of nervousness in her voice. Instead, what he got was arrogance. She stood in front of the new house with her arms crossed, her chin slightly raised, and that smug little smile that she always wore when she thought she was winning. To her, there was nothing wrong with what she had done. She acted as if building a mansion on someone else's land was as casual as planting flowers. "Daniel," she said smoothly, "I don't understand why you're so upset. Look at this house. Isn't it beautiful? Don't you think it makes the neighborhood look better? You had all this land just sitting here for years doing nothing. I've given it life. I've given it value. Honestly, you should be thanking me." Daniel stared at her, his eyes cold. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. She wasn't apologizing. She wasn't even pretending to have made a mistake. She was justifying it, as though she had done him a favor. "This isn't your land, Karen," he said firmly. "It was never yours to touch. You knew that." Karen waved her hand dismissively, as though swatting away a fly. "Oh, please. Technicalities. Who even cares about paperwork when the result is so much better? No one ever saw you do anything with this land?" A real eyesore compared to the rest of the neighborhood. "I just stepped up and did what needed to be done. Everyone in the HOA agrees it's for the best." That made Daniel's jaw clench. The HOA, of course, she would bring them into it, as though their opinion was law. Karen had always used the HOA. Like her personal army, twisting rules to her benefit. She thrived on control, on the feeling that everyone had to listen to her. And now she was trying to use that same power to cover up her theft. Daniel forced himself to stay calm. Losing his temper wouldn't help. I don't care what the HOA says. They don't own this property. I do. I have the documents, the deed, everything. You've built your house on my land, Karen, and you know it. Karen laughed, an irritating sound that made Daniel's blood boil. Oh, Daniel, you're so dramatic. You really think you can fight this? I have friends in the city office, people who handle permits. Everything looks official, and that's all that matters. No one's going to believe you over me. You're just a man clinging to some old dirt while I've created something valuable. Her confidence was shocking. She wasn't even hiding her schemes anymore. She truly believed her connections and fake charm would protect her. To her, Daniel was just an obstacle, someone too weak to stop her. But what she didn't understand was that Daniel wasn't weak. He was patient. He had grown up with a grandfather who taught him that sometimes battles were won not with noise but with quiet strength. He didn't need to scream to make his point. He leaned slightly closer and said in a low, steady voice, "You've crossed a line you can't erase." Karen's smile faltered for just a second, but then she quickly covered it with her usual arrogance. "You'll see, Daniel. In time, you'll realize this is better for everyone. You should move on and let go. Holding on to that land was silly. Now, it's part of something greater." Her words echoed in Daniel's mind long after he walked away. He had never seen such bold lies spoken so casually. She didn't just build on his land. She had convinced herself that she had the right. 2. That kind of arrogance was dangerous. She could stand there and claim she had improved the land. What else was she capable of justifying? That night, Daniel sat at his kitchen table, the deed papers spread out in front of him. He ran his fingers over his grandfather's name, then his father's, and finally his own. 3 generations tied to that soil. And now Karen, with her smirks and her HOA influence, wanted to erase all of that history as if it meant nothing. His phone buzzed with messages from neighbors. Some of them supported him quietly, saying they were shocked at Karen's boldness. But others hinted that maybe Karen was right, that perhaps it was better to have a nice house there instead of just an empty field. The words cut Daniel deeply. It was as though people valued appearances more than truth. He didn't sleep much that night. He kept thinking of how Karen had laughed at him, how she had spoken with such certainty, as though she already knew she would win. Her arrogance wasn't just about the house. It was about her belief that she was untouchable. And that, Daniel realized, was exactly where her weakness lay. The next day, Daniel tried to talk to a few more neighbors. He wanted to understand what Karen had told them. One by one, he heard the same story. Karen claimed the land was abandoned, that Daniel had no interest in it, and that she had taken the initiative to beautify the area. Some even repeated her exact words that she was doing everyone a favor. Daniel's anger grew, but so did his determination. He saw clearly now. Karen wasn't just greedy, she was a manipulator. She twisted truth into lies and made people believe them. She wore confidence like armor, and most people never questioned her. But Daniel wasn't like most people. He knew the truth, and he had proof. That afternoon, he stood once more at the edge of his land, staring at the towering house. It looked polished, strong, and expensive. But to him, it was hollow. Every brick, every window, every wall stood as a monument to Karen's arrogance. He whispered to himself, "You built your dream house on a lie. I'll make sure you pay for it." He remembered how Karen had tried to brush him off with her fake kindness. The way she had said, "Don't be so dramatic." The way she had rolled her eyes as if his family's history, his grandfather's legacy, and his rights meant nothing compared to her selfish dream. He felt a fire burn in his chest. The following week, Karen threw a little celebration. At her new house, she invited neighbors over, showing off the polished floors, the big kitchen, the wide balcony. People walked around complimenting her taste, sipping drinks, laughing as though it were a normal gathering. Daniel didn't go inside, but he watched from the outside. He saw her standing in the middle of her living room, telling people how hard she had worked to make her dream house a reality. Every word she spoke was a lie, but no one corrected her. Daniel didn't storm in or make a scene. Instead, he stood quietly in the shadows, reminding himself that her lies wouldn't last forever. She could fool the neighborhood for now, but when the truth came out, she wouldn't be able to hide behind her smiles. Karen believed her power in the HOA would protect her. She believed her fake charm would win people over. She believed Daniel would eventually give up, too tired to fight her. But what she didn't believe, what she couldn't even imagine, was how far Daniel was willing to go to protect what was his. He left that night with a calm face, but inside, his plan was already forming. Karen thought she had silenced him with her bold lies. What she didn't realize was that she had only pushed him to fight harder. And when the time came, she would learn that the land she thought she owned was never hers to begin with. Daniel knew that if he wanted to win against Karen, he couldn't rely on anger or arguments. He needed to rely on facts, on proof, and on the law. Lies were strong, but they were nothing compared to the truth. The first thing he did was contact a lawyer, a man who had dealt with property disputes before. When Daniel showed him the deed, the maps, and the papers that clearly showed the land had always been in his family, the lawyer nodded with confidence. "This is your property. No question," he said firmly. "What she's done here is illegal, and the law will not protect her once we bring this forward." Hearing those words gave Daniel strength. For the first time since he had seen that house standing on his land, he felt the weight lift a little from his chest. Karen had played a bold game, but she had overlooked one thing. She thought her influence made her untouchable. But the law was not hers to control. Within a few days, official papers were prepared. Karen, in all her pride and comfort, received them at her doorstep. The moment she opened the envelope, her fake smile faded. The documents were clear and harsh. She had built her house illegally on land she did not own. She was being summoned to court to answer for her actions. The shocking reminder Daniel had promised her was finally in her hands. And for the first time, she couldn't laugh it off. The neighborhood buzzed with whispers. People who had once attended Karen's parties or complimented her house were now talking behind her back. They were shocked that she had actually built on someone else's land, and many began to distance themselves. Karen had always prided herself on her reputation as a leader, but now cracks were showing. Some neighbors even apologized too, Daniel privately admitting that they had believed her lies, but now understood the truth. Karen, however, wasn't ready to give up. She marched to Daniel's door one evening, waving the court papers in her hand. "You're really going to do this?" she snapped, her voice sharp but trembling underneath. "Do you know how much I've invested in that house? Do you know how much money I've spent? Can't just take that away from me." Daniel looked at her calmly. "I didn't take anything from you. You stole from me. You built your dream house on my land. That was your choice. Now you face the consequences." Her eyes widened, and for a moment, Daniel thought she might actually break down. But then, her pride kicked in again. She straightened her shoulders and hissed, "You'll regret this. Everyone will hate you for tearing down something so beautiful." But even as she spoke, her voice shook. Deep down, she knew her power was slipping. The law was against her, and the neighbors who once admired her were no longer on her side. The day of the court hearing came quickly. Daniel sat quietly, his documents stacked neatly in front of him. His lawyer spoke clearly, showing the judge the chain of ownership that went back decades. Every page, every signature, every official stamp painted the same picture. The land belonged to Daniel, and only Daniel. When it was Karen's turn, she tried everything. She told the judge she thought the land was abandoned, that she believed no one cared about it. She argued that she had improved the neighborhood, that the house she built added value to the community. She even shed fake tears, claiming she had poured her life savings into the property and would be ruined if she lost it. But the judge was unmoved. The law was simple and clear. Whether the land had been empty or not didn't matter. Ownership mattered. Permission mattered. And Karen had neither. After listening to both sides, the judge gave the ruling. The property legally belonged to Daniel. The house had been built without his consent, and Karen was responsible for removing it at her own cost. The courtroom was silent as the words sank. Karen's face turned pale, her lips pressed tightly together as if she could hold back the humiliation. Daniel, on the other hand, felt a wave of relief wash over him. Justice had spoken, and it was on his side. The news spread quickly through the neighborhood. Karen, who once boasted about her dream house, now had to face the fact that it would be torn down. People whispered when she walked by, their admiration replaced with pity or judgment. Some even laughed quietly at how the mighty queen of the HOA had fallen so far. Demolition day arrived like a storm. Trucks pulled up, workers brought their equipment, and the sound of machines roared through the air. Neighbors gathered at a distance, watching as the walls came down piece by piece. The porch that Karen had once shown off proudly was reduced to rubble. The balcony where she had smiled at guests collapsed with a crash. Every beam and brick that had been raised with arrogance now fell to the ground. Karen stood far away, her face hard and unreadable, but her eyes wet. She couldn't stop it. All the money, all the pride, all the effort she had poured into the house had been wasted. The shocking reminder Daniel had promised her had come true. You cannot steal what isn't yours and expect to keep it. Daniel didn't watch with joy, but with quiet strength. It wasn't about revenge for him, it was about justice. He had protected his family's land, the promise he had made to his grandfather. The house that didn't belong there was gone, and the land was his again, free and unbroken. Neighbors began approaching him after the demolition. They shook his hand. Some apologized again for doubting him, and others praised his patience. They admitted that Karen's arrogance had fooled them, but in the end, truth had won. Karen, however, disappeared from the spotlight. She resigned from the HOA, unable to face the shame. The woman who once ruled the neighborhood with sharp words and false charm now walked quietly, avoiding eye contact. Her reputation was gone, and she had no one to blame but herself. For Daniel, the victory wasn't loud or dramatic. It was silent, steady, and deeply satisfying. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't boast. He simply stood firm and let the truth do the work. And in the end, the truth was enough to bring down even the proudest of lies. The land, though scarred from the destruction, was still his. He walked across it one evening, the rubble cleared away, the soil fresh and open again. He felt the wind against his face and closed his eyes. His grandfather's words echoed in his heart. If you care for the land, it will always care for you. Daniel smiled softly. He had kept that promise. No matter what challenges came his way, he knew the land would always stand as a reminder that greed could never win against patience, truth, and rightful ownership. After the court's decision and the demolition of the house, Karen's world began to crumble. The woman who once walked around the neighborhood with her head held high, giving orders and acting like she owned everything, now moved quietly, almost hiding from the people she once controlled. Her arrogance had been stripped away piece by piece, just like her house. But even after all that, she wasn't ready to let go completely. One evening, she knocked on Daniel's door, her voice softer than he had ever heard it. She looked tired, her eyes swollen, as though she hadn't slept properly in weeks. She tried to sound calm, but her tone carried desperation. Daniel, she said, I know we've had our differences, but I want to make you an offer. Let me buy the land from you. I'll pay you double its value, maybe even more. Lost so much already? But if I can at least keep the land, I can rebuild. Please, let me make this right. Daniel listened carefully, but his heart was firm. He remembered all the times she had mocked him, all the lies she had told, all the arrogance she had shown. She hadn't cared about making things right when she took his land without permission. She hadn't cared about him when she stood in front of her stolen house and laughed in his face. Now that the law had humbled her, she wanted forgiveness only because it served her. He shook his head. No, Karen, this land isn't for sale. Not now, not ever. It was my grandfather's, it was my father's, and now it's mine. By your way out of what you did, her face fell, and for a moment she looked as if she might argue, but instead her shoulders slumped. Without another word, she turned and walked away. That was the last time she ever asked him for the land. News of Karen's downfall spread far beyond their neighborhood. People in nearby communities whispered about the woman who had been so greedy that she built her dream home on someone else's property. Her name became a lesson in arrogance, a reminder that pride often leads to destruction. Parents told their children the story as a warning. Don't take what isn't yours, because in the end, it will cost you everything. Meanwhile, Daniel began to feel a sense of peace return to his life. The land was his again, and though it carried the scars of the demolished house, he knew he could restore it. He spent weekends walking across it, planting small trees, and cleaning the soil. Each step reminded him that patience had won that. Truth had stood firm, even against lies and influence. Some neighbors, who once believed Karen's words, came to him with apologies. "We were wrong," one elderly man admitted. "We thought she was helping the neighborhood, but now we see she was only helping herself. You were right to fight back." Others admired his calmness. Most people would have exploded, but "You handled it with dignity," a woman said. Daniel smiled politely at their words, but he didn't need their praise. What mattered most to him was that his grandfather's promise had been kept. He remembered how his grandfather used to pat the soil and say, "This land is our roots. Never let it go, no matter who tries to take it." And Daniel hadn't. Karen's life, on the other hand, never returned to what it was. She resigned from her position as HOA president, unable to face the humiliation of being laughed at during meetings. The woman who once hosted large parties and gatherings now lived in a smaller rented home outside the neighborhood. People avoided her, not out of cruelty, but because they no longer respected her. The same mouth that once gave orders was now silent, and the same eyes that once looked down on others now looked away in shame. For Daniel, justice wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about watching her fall. It was about balance being restored. He hadn't destroyed her, her own greed had. He had simply stood his ground, protecting what was his, and the truth had done the rest. One evening, as he sat under the oldest tree on the land, Daniel looked up at the sky. The stars were out, scattered like diamonds, and the cool breeze carried the scent of grass. He thought about everything that had happened: the shock of seeing the house, the anger of being lied to, the relief of the court's ruling, and the peace that followed. He realized that the land had taught him something more than just patience. It had taught him that when you hold on to what is rightfully yours, no one, no matter how arrogant, can truly take it away. In the months that followed, Daniel began to plant more trees and flowers, slowly turning the land into a small garden. Neighbors would sometimes pass by and smile at the sight of him working with his hands in the soil. Children played near the trees, laughing, and even the birds seemed to sing louder. The land was alive again, not with greed, but with care. One day, a young boy from the neighborhood came to him and asked, "Mr. Daniel, is it true someone tried to steal your land?" Daniel looked at the boy kindly and nodded. "Yes, it's true." But the land knew the truth. It came back to where it belongs. The boy frowned in thought, then said, "That means the land is like family, right? No one can take your family away." Ezekiel smiled. "Exactly. The land is family." That simple conversation reminded him why he had fought so hard. It wasn't about pride or stubbornness. It was about protecting something that held history, roots, and meaning as time went on. The memory of Karen's house faded, but the lesson never did. Neighbors often used her story as a reminder that greed leads to downfall, while patience and honesty always last. Whenever Daniel walked through his land, he didn't feel bitterness anymore. Instead, he felt gratitude. He had been tested, and he had stood firm. Karen's shocking reminder wasn't just a lesson for her, it was a lesson for everyone. She learned that money, influence, and arrogance could not erase the truth. And Daniel learned that even when the fight seems unfair, justice has a way of shining through if you stand for what is right, and so life returned to peace. The land stood strong, the trees grew taller, and Daniel's heart was light. He didn't need to build a mansion or prove anything to anyone. His victory was quiet, steady, and everlasting, just like the land he had fought so hard to protect.